to the few people that don't know you, can you introduce yourself?
Yeah, hi, my name is Mark Russell. I'm a writer primarily of comic books, some of which have already been mentioned here. Rumpus Room, Second Coming. I'm probably best known for the Flintstones. That was the comic that sort of gave me a career in comics. I've also written things for DC and Marvel. I've written Superman comics with Mike Allred on art, and I've written a Fantastic Four comic. So I've written a lot of comic books from both the angle of writing superheroes and well-known properties, and also really obscure creator-owned stuff that tells my own sort of stories as well.
Yeah, here in Brazil, we have a bunch of your stuff. Not all, but a bunch. We have not only your Flintstones, but we have Not All Robots, Rumpus Room is coming, Second Coming, and we have your work with Incal, the metaverse stuff. Yeah, Psicoverse, yes. We have that as well here. First of all, so we get to know you a little bit better. What was your introduction to the comic book genre, and what would you recommend to someone that is starting right now?
Well, when I was a kid, I would get comic books whenever we went on a family trip, whenever we got in the car and went somewhere. But they were usually like Mighty Mouse comics or Donald Duck or something. It wasn't until I was actually in college, and I'd always sort of assumed that's what comics were. They were just sort of things that little kids read on book trips. It wasn't until I was in college and I had a friend who was a really big fan of comics, and he turned me on to V for Vendetta and also Sandman. There was the two comics he gave me, and I was sort of blown away. I felt like the medium had taken a quantum leap, and it had grown up with me in a way. And that was sort of my rediscovery, my re-entry into the medium of comics.
You produce a type of art that it's very critical, but it's not in the same way as V for Vendetta, for example, because you are pretty much like satire. You have humor, and in a sense, it's kind of light, but you're tackling some heavy issues. Do you have something that came before you that kind of inspires you to produce something like that? Because I don't know many names that do that.
Yeah, and I think that it's just mostly just this is how I think of things, or this is how I process things on my own. I feel like my writing is more than anything like a form of therapy to me. Like, it's how I process difficult subjects. The things that keep me awake at night don't seem as deadly if I can sort of laugh at them. And so I think just for my own self-defense, I tend to think of things satirically or try to think of like this as being ridiculous or surreal. And that comes through my writing. It's not like I set out to write a satiric piece. It's that I set out to write a piece about the thing that terrifies me. And it ends up being satirical just because that's what I have to do to keep myself from being too scared of it.
And that's interesting that you said that, because when I read a Mark Russell comic, I already know that there's going to be humor and there's going to be political commentary, political commentary. But I also weirdly expect some hopefulness. Usually when I finish your comics, it gives me a sense of hope, because I don't know why, but when I finish, I think that, well, it might be everything okay at the end. Like, we might make it. Is that something that you do on purpose? Because you said that you do it for yourself, but that's something that I get as well when I finish your books, because you talk about some heavy stuff, but somehow when I close the book, I feel better. I feel like, yeah, that it might work out.
Yeah, I think it's definitely something I do either on purpose or sometimes just subconsciously, because I feel like as I'm going into the depths of talking about how destructive something like AI or automation or the capital class basically destroying our, creating their own getaway car while they destroy the rest of the planet. When I think about these things, if I don't feel like it's going to be okay, or if I don't feel like there's some way out of it, if I don't feel like there's some solution, then why am I even bothering to think about it? What's the point in obsessing over these things if I don't think there's any hope? And so whether I want to or not, hope and solutions just sort of worm their way into the story, because don't know what the point is of even talking about it if there's not some sort of ray of light at the end.
Yeah, well, that makes sense. And we're going to talk about it a little bit more. But first, I wanted to know, like, what does the comic book genre as a medium fits so well for the type of stuff that you do? What I don't know, like, I don't know if you choose it or if it chose you, but why comics? Why didn't you like go to try to communicate that same feeling in another way?
Well, it sort of chose me, but I am very happy to be on the dance floor with comic books because, one, it allows me to tell a story visually. And I've discovered after I started writing comics that this is the way I think. I think visually. I mean, I like writing prose, but when I'm telling a story, I'm imagining it in my mind. So I actually work much better, I think, at writing comics than prose. And also, it's unlike other visual mediums like TV and film, it's cheap, you know, and I say that not pejoratively, but because when you don't have focus groups, you know, watching your movie and deciding whether or not they like it, if you don't have executives worried about whether or not you're wasting their $20 million, then you don't have people interfering with your storytelling. You can tell the kind of stories in comics that might not make an executive happy. You can tell the kind of stories that are unique or talking about things that most people wouldn't want to make a movie about because they're unique to you and the way what you see as what the world needs. And you can get away with it in comics because it's a relatively low initial investment for whoever's paying for it. And I feel like if you are writing a comic book and you're not doing that, you're not telling a story that can't be told in any other medium because you've got this rare chance to sort of tell a dirty joke while the adults aren't looking, then why are you bothering with the medium? That's what we should all be doing. It's like telling the stories we couldn't get away with if we worked in a more expensive medium.
I like to talk about politics. And I like to talk about politics in relate to pop culture and science fiction and fantasy. So if by any moment, I don't think that's going to be an issue with you. That's one of the reasons why I like your comics. But if in any moment you have an issue with it, just let me know, okay?
I talk about politics all the time in my comics.
I know, and that's why I love your comics.
I don't know how you live in this world and not talk about it, frankly.
Okay, so the next question is going to be about that because the political landscape in the U.S. and in Brazil, it's kind of similar. Sadly, it is kind of similar. We both have like one figure that self-proclaims conservative, that kind of manages himself pretty much, I would define, by attacking the existence of others, and somehow that attracts a large mass of people. And in the pop culture scenario here in Brazil, in the comic books and in the everything related to geekdom, we have also here in Brazil, like I know you have it in the US as well, like a portion of those kind of people like trying to take ownership of the comic books and the video games and trying to exclude everything that is not what their defined version of that kind of medium is. And debate that usually always comes back here in Brazil, it's those people wanting to exclude the politics from the comic books and from video games. Like if there's a person of color in the video games or the comic books, that's woke. We don't like that. That's not my comic book. And they try to exclude that. And they always claim the separation of the art and the politics. Do you believe that you can produce art without politics?
I think you can, but I don't think that's what they're doing. I think that what they're doing is choosing the status quo as a political ally. And choosing the status quo is itself a political position. If the status quo is we don't have, any minorities or, there's only one woman character for every 10 male characters, that's a political position. It just happens to be the one of the status quo. And so I have no problem challenging that. In fact, it should be challenged. And I think the people who say, oh, we don't want politics in comics, we just want it the way it was when I was a kid. Well, they are also wanting politics in comics. They just want their own politics in comics. They're just too embarrassed, I think, to say what those politics really are, which is are what I think you correctly identify them as the politics of exclusion.
Yeah.
They don't want to make a case for why there shouldn't be women or why there shouldn't be, other ethnicities in comic books or in TV or movies. They don't want to make that case because it's deeply embarrassing, because it exposes them as racists and misogynists. So what they say instead is, well, I want comics the way they were in 1992, when there were no black characters in comics, or when you could the ratio was one woman for every 10 men. They want that world, or they want those sort of political assumptions embedded in comics, which is not the same as not wanting politics in comics.
And I remember when the movie Dogma by Kevin Smith came out, there was a lot of backlash from religious groups and try to boycott the movie. And did you had any kind of similar reaction with your comic, second coming, something that people trying to push back?
Oh yeah, I had a very strong pushback, and the weird thing is that it happened before the comic had even come out. Like before anyone had ever read a page of Second Coming, there was a huge movement to get DC, which was originally going to publish it under Vertigo, to drop it. There was an online petition that ultimately generated about 500,000 signatures, each one of which auto-populated an angry email to Dan DiDio's email address, who was the publisher at DC at the time. And eventually the kitchen got a little hot, and they did sort of ask me politely to consider taking the comic elsewhere, which I did, and it worked out great for everyone, because they stopped being hounded by these people online, and I was able to get it made exactly the way I wanted at Ahoy. So it worked out well. But yeah, there was a lot of negative pressure. Like people, when it was initially announced, when it was initially announced, it wasn't that big of a deal. I did get a few people just sort of hitting me up on social media with like rude comments and whatnot, but that's okay. That's par for the course for any time I'm on a project. What really sort of was different was about 6 months later, 6 months after it had been announced, but before it had come out yet, Fox News did a story about it. And that's when it just went haywire. It's like, that's when the zombie horde comes after you, when Fox News does a story about it. Things people had never heard of before. And this is not just true of my comic. This is true of, like critical race theory, or, quote unquote, the trans agenda or whatever. Anytime Fox News does something their viewers had never even heard of or didn't care about, suddenly becomes the most important thing in their lives. And they've got to react. And I was briefly, for like just a moment, I got the wrong end of that right-wing fire hose of anger. And yeah, it was very powerful. It did sort of essentially force us to go with another publisher. But the weird thing is before anyone had even read it. So nobody knew if it was blasphemous. Nobody knew what it was about, really. They just knew it was about Jesus Christ sharing an apartment with the superhero. And that was enough for them to be angry about.
Well, yeah, I wouldn't describe myself like a good Christian, but I would say it's not blasphemous at all. And
I did not think it was. I mean, I was stupid enough to imagine that people would actually wait until they'd read the comic to form an opinion about it. And I thought, well, once people read this, they're going to realize this is not an anti-Christian comic. In fact, Christ is the good guy.
Yeah, and that takes me to my next question, because somehow reading the book, it made me think, like, why is it so strange to me when I read it, and this depiction of Jesus Christ, like such an easygoing, like makes friends everywhere, tries to solve everything, chat with everyone. Why is it so alien to me? I was raised Christian, but when I got to my youth, like teenage years, I kind of got away with it, got away from it, and I never wanted to come back. My experiences with some of my family that has this attachment to the religion was not so good, so I never felt compelled to come back, and I never really thought too much about Jesus Christ. But the image that I have of Jesus Christ wasn't this one. I want to be friends with this guy, but why do you think that maybe some people like me would never imagine Jesus Christ like you depicted?
Well, because the Jesus in the Bible, the Jesus who actually had teachings and thoughts and opinions on the world, is very different than the Jesus of the church or the Jesus of the institutions that now control those teachings. I think that, you know, the two sort of core messages of Christ were don't allow yourself to be bribed and don't allow yourself to be threatened. You know, and he's like, if you can not do those two things, the world has no power over you. Because this is how we get everyone on the planet to do what we want them to do. Either we'll put you in jail or harm you if you don't do it, or we'll pay you. We'll give you money or privileges if you do. And this is how the entire world comes under control. And so if somebody's saying, well, don't care about material possessions, don't be bribable, and also live as though you're living on borrowed time and don't live out of fear, they've immediately taken away the tools that any empire can use to get you to do their bidding. And so while it was, I think, an incredibly attractive religion and teachings for people who were living under the thumb of an empire, whether it was the Roman Empire or whoever, and it is not a very useful dogma for the people who run an empire themselves. In fact, it's the last thing you want people to hear. So when it became the official religion of the Roman Empire and later of other nation states like the United States and the European nation states of the Middle Ages, that the message, the teachings of Christ were sort of discarded or at least put in the background. And they're more about like, well, hey, if you want to go to heaven, then you got to follow these rules. Or, oh, hey, if you kick into our empire, we'll knock 40 years off purgatory for you. You know, it became much more about, again, the bribing and the threatening and less about the teachings of just like living, without needs or fears.
Well, one thing that stood out to me in the comic book is how Sunstar, it's kind of an arrogant, like he's kind of an ass sometimes, and he doesn't notice it. And in the first volume, you see how Jesus Christ like kind of gets to him. Like you see some moments when Sunstar gets some self-reflection and starts to maybe questioning the what he's capable of and what he's not capable of. What do you think that could do the same thing to us as a society? Because sometimes I feel like we are kind of the Sunstar, like we have a difficulty like realizing that we're fucking shit up and we're doing the wrong stuff.
Yeah.
And sometimes it's hard to see or to find something that gets through to people. Like, do you have something that you think you could do that?
Yeah, well, my theory is that the reason why things are so politically divided right now, and the reason why you have characters like Trump and Bolsonaro, like sort of claiming the imagination of people, is because both the left and the right seem to sort of agree on the idea that society as we've created it is coming to an end. That the world as we knew it, that business as usual, whether through climate change or through mass immigration and refugees, which are completely 100% related, that whatever our stable way of life is coming to an end. And they both have sort of two different visions of how we can survive the end. The left or the more liberal vision is like, well, if we open the doors and work together as a species, if we help each other survive, if we create like a unified sort of human response to the catastrophes we've created and help each other survive, then we will survive. And the right's response is we need to lock ourselves in this bunker with our guns and our canned food and shoot anybody who comes to the door because they're here to take our stuff. And I think that the right has done a much better job of getting that vision out, getting that message out to people. Like, this is what we need to do to protect ourselves now from the end that is coming. And I think also people being sort of visceral, sort of fear motivated creatures, that's a much more powerful message, because that's something I can do right now. That's something I can, vote this way, and I can do these 2 or 3 things, and I'm ready to take on the world. Whereas the left's message of like, well, we need to sort of open borders and become more about human survival than about our national survival, that's a little more amorphous and weird. It's like harder to define. But I think that this is it, is like, we have to define it, but it's also a much better long-term strategy. So you employ the right-wing strategy, then what, even if you succeed, what you're ultimately going to have to turn on each other to, you're going to be ultimately shooting. It's going to be these right-wing people shooting at each other to get the last can of beans, So I think only by actually like integrating globally and thinking of ourselves more as a species than as different nation states and helping each other survive in whatever ways we can is by far the best long-term strategy for human survival. It's just harder to explain to people.
Yeah.
It's harder to get people, it's harder to put into like an agenda, like a 10-point, do these 10 things and we'll be safe. But I think it really starts with reminding people that how much we rely upon other human beings. I think it's more about like reminding people what a weird and special thing it is to be a human being. As far as we know, the only sentient being aware that it is in the universe, and it's too important to risk our own extinction. I think we give the universe something it does not have without us, which is an experience of itself. And that in and of itself makes us, I think, incredibly unique and special and worth preserving. We just have to remind ourselves that the other people on the planet are just as unique and worth saving as we are.
This is a kind of following the same subject. In Second Coming, you seem to criticize our popular conceptions of strength, of power, and in Not All Robots, you make a pretty good depiction of the people that go to the rabbit hole of the internet and turn to the alt-right and stuff, the frustration that leads to trying to meet people online. They're kind of have the same frustrations that us, that leads to reading a bunch of weird stuff and maybe taking action and doing some horrible stuff. How would you think that we could talk to people that may be going to that road right now? Like, they're not there yet. They're not like totally violent and totally crazy, like tinfoil hat stuff like that, but they're going that road. Like, could we speak to those people?
I think you have to remind people that the algorithm rewards disinformation. That if you are going down the rabbit hole, you are willingly going into the den of liars. Because I'll give you a perfect example. It's like a flat Earth society. It's like flat Earth beliefs have become a pretty commonplace thing, which they haven't been since like the 15th century or so. But why is that? The reason is because people who believe that the Earth is flat and that the globe and the nature of planets are kind of a massive conspiracy, they're very motivated to talk to you about it. They're very motivated to make YouTube videos and to tell you about it. People who believe that the world is round or spherical are not motivated. It's like there are no like YouTube channels that are just about how the Earth is round. No one's out there. It's like, well, actually, it's a globe, and so the liars get a lie without any sort of rebuttal, because the people who are holding the boring truth don't feel the need to sort of like persuade people. They feel, well, it's obvious. It's like there's a million reasons why it's obvious the world is round. It's just sort of the received wisdom and think about all the things that wouldn't be possible if the world were flat. It almost seems so. We've created with the algorithm a information um, universe where the biggest liars are the most profitable people on there. And I think this is the thing you have to sort of explain to people. It's like that if you're going down the algorithm, or then you are willingly allowing yourself to be lied to. The algorithm does not take you to the most boring yet most accurate places. And I think also we need, it's sort of like when supermarkets began, when they started putting out industrialized food in the early 20th century, there were no rules on it. So yeah, you could put arsenic in pork and beans, and there was no law against it. There's no law against making food that was utterly unsafe and poisonous for the people that were eating it, because nobody had ever thought to create regulations of this, because it had never been a problem until we started making food on an industrial scale using chemicals and technologies that had never been used before. I feel like we're at that point with the information economy, where it's like, we have allowed the algorithms to promote and reward dangerous disinformation that's getting people killed, disinformation that cost millions of people their lives in a pandemic because they were knowingly and purposely lied to. We're at the point where the arsenic's in the pork and beans. We need to start passing laws, food and health regulations to make sure the food supply is safe, or in this case, the information supply is not completely been overrun by the people who would poison you, and because it's profitable to do so.
And on the other side, you have people that I can understand that kind of feel hopeless when you see everything that's going on. When you see Trump getting reelected now, you kind of get this sensation, that this feeling that it might not work out. I don't know what to do now. Like I talk to people online a lot, and from time to time, people get that feeling and talk to me about it. Personally, I would recommend your comics because I do feel like they are very hopeful. But what would you say to those people to maybe get up and keep going and do something?
Well, I would say the only thing that I know of that can't be undone is death. So if you're still alive, if the country's still alive, if humanity and understanding are still alive, then it's not too late to undo the damage that's been done. I feel like that's basically the best thing. And I think Brazil's a good example of that, about how it looked very much like we in the United States were looking at Brazil with the same sort of concerns that I'm sure Brazil is looking at the United States with right now. Like, this could be the moment they go over the waterfall and just, fall into a fascist dictatorship, which feels very possible to me here in the United States. But it was undoable in Brazil. It's undoable in the United States.
Recently, on CCXP, a new publisher here in Brazil, Poptopia, announced that they're going to publish the Rumpus Room. And, well, I read about the comic, and it's a pretty crazy concept. I don't even know how to describe it, but I like what I saw. Like, the concept is kind of crazy. But what would you say to the Brazilian reader to get them to maybe take a look at the comic?
Okay, well, it's sort of a parable for American democracy, but the basic premise, if I haven't lost you already, if that doesn't sound boring enough to you, but the basic premise is that this billionaire puts everybody who crosses him into what he calls his rumpus room, which is basically a prison in the basement of his house. And one by one, he will have the people in this rumpus room crushed and turned into like a skin cream. The best skin cream that money can buy, that keeps them looking young. And but he does allow them the privilege of voting on who will be the next person to be crushed and turned into skin cream. And so they have to form these two sort of party blocks to vote each other into like the cage, where the person who's in the cage will be turned into skin cream. And it divides into basically two parties. One party is the people who've been in there forever, the people who've been there long, and then the other party is the newcomers, the people who've just been recently put into the rumpus room, which I think like, as I wrote it to be sort of like a funny and yet violent parable for what American democracy is right now.
When I read the concept of the book, like this one in particular, because everything that I've read from you so far, I don't know exactly where you got the idea, but I can kind of like maybe think of it. I noticed all the possible criticisms that you're trying to bring with this new work, but where do you get the idea? Because it's kind of I'm gonna have a hard time thinking of another story that kind of resembles to this one. There are a couple, but not too many. That's kind of off the box in a lot of ways.
Well, in part, I was inspired by the story of Elizabeth Bathory, who was a Hungarian countess who used to bathe in the blood of virgins because she thought it kept her younger looking. And I just thought, well, this is like, this is a sort of a model for every billionaire who's come along since. I'm amazed that we even consider her to be like a villain or anymore. I'm amazed that we don't see her as like an aspirational figure. But also just thinking of like parables, like if I had to explain what I think the problem was something in the least boring way possible, what sort of fable would I turn it into? And to me, this was like not only, and I don't want everything just to exist as like a parable or a fable. It has to work as a story. Like if you didn't get the point I was making, it should still be fun and entertaining as a story. And this was like a story where I thought this works on either level. You can read it as like a critique of like American capitalism / democracy, or you can just read it as a story about a guy who crushes people in his basement, turns them into skin cream. And I think it works either way.
Yeah, well, I'm super excited to read it. I think it's gonna come on the second semester of this year, and really excited for it. Well, now to close this interview, we have one kind of a speed run of questions. You don't have to justify anything, but if you want to explain or expand on your answers, that's fine. So it's just you can tell whatever you want. Okay. So first question: one author, dead or alive, that you would like to have a coffee with?
Well, I'll go with my favorite author of all time. It was Kurt Vonnegut Jr.
And one fictional character that you would like to do the same?
I'm going to go with Gilgamesh.
That's an interesting. I do these questions for everyone that I interview, and that's pretty unique in a lot of ways. Lord of the Rings or Narnia?
Lord of the Rings.
Star Trek or Doctor Who?
Star Trek.
Star Wars or Dune?
Dune.
Alien or Predator?
Aliens.
Blade Runner or Terminator?
Blade Runner.
Well, Mark, thank you so much for taking the time to have this conversation with me. And just so we can finish this on a good note, I would like you, if you can, to send a message to the Brazilian readers that are going to listen to this interview. And I hope that you come back to the next CXP. Last year I couldn't go, but I hope
that was my favorite. That was my favorite convention of all time. Still my favorite convention I've ever been to. Yeah, I would love to come back to CCXP. So, hola Brazil. Please check out Rumpus Room when it comes out.